how and where you can freelance. Okay, now in this video, we want to get into the next level of detail for freelancers. We want to ask two questions. The first is, where is it that you can find the freelance opportunities? The second, how do you freelance? In other words, what are the different models for setting up a freelance gig? So let's explore both in a bit more depth. Okay, so the first question is where you can find the freelance opportunities. So the answer is that there's many places, and we explore some of the main categories right here. So the first one that you see is traditional job sites. Now, you're going to recognize a lot of these names as they're some of the more popular job boards. Now, when a company wants to hire, whether it's full-time, part-time, or temporarily, they'll put out a job description, and then the job seekers can search and filter by location, by industry, job type, all kinds of different things. So for freelance gigs, there's the ability to filter by temporary or contract work. So think of all the companies that advertise jobs this way. Many are doing so with freelance jobs, so you can go to any of these sites and you can find the gigs. The second category is general freelancer marketplaces. So these are very similar to job boards, but they're actually exclusive to freelance gigs. So the cool part of these sites is many small businesses are on here, advertising opportunities, and then these sites actually take care of all the logistics to actually hook you up with the job. So they do things like recruiting, communications, file sharing and payments. You can filter by any industry or skill, and you can search for gigs on these sites. So you can upload your resume, your portfolio, and then you can specify your rate as well. These sites have become the most popular way for freelance opportunities to be found, and they're definitely worth checking out. The third different method is niche sites. So whereas the general freelance marketplaces have every type of job from every industry, the niche sites are nice because you can join a community of people within your trade. So let's say you're a writer, or you're a designer, a programmer, or really anything else. There's sites that are catering specifically to you. These types of sites offer the same freelance opportunities, but they have features that are a lot more specific to that niche. So it's definitely worth looking at the names we mentioned, but more so, just find the ones that are within your functional area. Fourth are collaborative sites. Now, collaborative sites are also typically niche to industry, but they also offer features to actually do the jobs themselves. So some of the ones mentioned here have interactive features where you can work on projects with team members. You can share all the outputs with your employers or recruiters. And then you can actually convert the work that you do into things like portfolios, resumes, or websites. These sites also have job opportunities both in regular employment as well as in freelance. We really like these sites, and we really think they offer a unique way of working. The fifth category we see all the time are competition-based sites. Competition-based sites are another style of freelancing. So for these, an employer will post a job, and rather than going and sending your resume and applying to that job, you actually do a portion of the full job itself. So the applicant with the best work, as judged by the employer, will win the competition of that job. And then they'll receive some award type, so it's usually some sort of compensation. Now, these sites are great because there's a lot of jobs posted, and thus you can use them to actually practice your skills, build your portfolio, and then, of course, potentially be rewarded for a great performance. And you don't even need to truly do a real application in order to be part of that job. So these are really great sites for students and a lot of people without the experience that are necessary to get the jobs in some of the other marketplaces. Really cool sites, so definitely worth checking out. Finally, you have the traditional consulting companies. Now, as we mentioned before, these are well-known firms with an army of professional consultants or freelancers that work directly for these companies. The business model is basically freelance, where you apply for big jobs that are governed by a contract. However, these firms match the right qualifications to the jobs that they themselves win and sell, and then they perform the short-term services as specified. So if you were to work for one of these companies, it's a way to basically have a freelance experience, all the different benefits of that sort of a job, but you're doing it in a non-independent way since you're actually working for one of the firms in question. So kind of has some of the pros and cons, as we'll talk about in a little bit, in terms of working for traditional consulting companies. Now, these are the 6 main categories that we see all the time with the different freelance sites, but there's so much more as well. You could go get a temporary job with a well-known brand. You could use a site like Craigslist or other classified-based sites to find more local jobs. You could use traditional service firms, so we talked about law firms, but there's ad firms, there's medical sites, there's all kinds of different things in that regard. And then there's staffing organizations, so you can go to a staffing company, have them find a more temporary job, and then you use that in order to get exposure in the freelance world. Most of all, you can approach firms directly, or they can recruit you directly. You don't always need a service, and as we'll cover in some of our other courses, this is a really, really good way of getting involved in freelancing. So those are the ways that people find freelance gigs. There's a lot of sites out there, and as freelancing continues to grow, these sites are becoming more and more prominent, with more and more of them popping up every single day. The question next is, how do people freelance? And there's probably more, but we're going to give you some of the most common freelance models. So the first is full-time. So this is where if you were to ask someone, what is your job? They would say, I'm a professional freelancer. And since their income is coming from all these different gigs, this is the sort of person that would move from gig to gig, client to client, and sometimes they do multiple projects all at the same time. But if you were to ask what's their full-time job, they're doing freelancing. The second way is through part-time work. So this is simple. Many people do temporary work in their spare time in addition to their full-time career. So they may do this to make a bit of extra money, or maybe because they like the work. But the fact is, the way they're doing this freelance work is not full-time, it's part-time. The third way people are doing it is as a qualifier. So this is something we love because we advise people on how to boost your qualifications at Reverse Tide. If you have big resume gaps, or you want to solidify your experience, it's a great way to build up your qualifications by doing real work for a real employer. And this will help improve your chances of getting a better job in the future. But freelancing is a great way to improve your qualifications. Fourth, a lot of people use freelancing as an educational tool. So for students either at a university or people who are just studying a new skill, this is an awesome way to test your knowledge of new concepts within the real world. So rather than classroom theory, you actually take what you learn and then you apply it. And this is really the best way to really educate yourself, to get real experience from real people. And there's so many people doing this, using freelance for that benefit. Next is contractor. So in this model, you might be directly tied to one company, and you may be indistinguishable from a regular employee. The only difference is you're on a contract. Many companies hire contractors for temporary work, or as a test before hiring full-time. And many people like it because your commitment is much lower. So a lot of people freelance in a contractor type of role. Next is agency. So many freelance as part of an agency. So this can be any of the models that we've discussed, but the difference here is that you're giving up the sales component of freelancing. Usually this means you give an agency a portion of your rate or a portion of your income in exchange for them finding you work. There's less upside in this model, but it's generally easier without having to do all the sales. The next way people do it is as a business. So this is a really cool way because when you apply to freelance gigs, it doesn't always have to be just you simply executing the work. You might have a whole team of people, which gives you the capability to make more money, to do more work, and really to do different types of work depending on who's on your team and what you're capable of doing. So many people start solo, and then as they get better and as they develop that freelance career, they might hire others to really make this a full-fledged business. Finally, people will often freestyle through lifestyle decisions, and they'll do it to fund those lifestyle choices. So they might trade things like room and board in exchange for work. So think of an au pair or someone who's working in the hospitality industry. They may even make money, but they choose to freelance to actually support that lifestyle choice that they made. So things like travel, working at home, or just any other life preference or hobby might actually fit this category. So as we said, these are 8 different ways, and there's a lot more reasons and ways that people freelance, but these are some of the more common ways that you'll ultimately see people do freelance work. Okay, so to wrap up this video, on this slide, you're going to see a chart of a lot of different freelance compensation structures. Now, in regular employee work, you're probably used to either having a set salary or maybe an hourly wage. Maybe you also get bonuses or you might get commissions for certain job types, but in freelancing, you're going to run into many different compensation structures. So in the graph that you see on this page, we go through the most common. And keep in mind, each gig will be different. So you might have a combination of these structures, you might only use one. Each gig is going to be totally different. But let's go to the graph. So as you go up on the graph, it shows your upside potential, and that's based on how you perform. However, the trade-off to reward is always going to be how risky is it. So as you go right on the graph, it becomes increasingly risky. So why don't we look at a few examples on here. So on the top right, if you have equity in a business or you gain commissions, you're taking a big risk that you may get paid very little or even nothing at all. However, if you do really well, the upside potential is unlimited. Those confident or seeking risk may like compensation in these types of ways. Now, towards the bottom left, you have exactly the opposite. You have the less risky earning methods, things like per hour rate or a fixed price for a piece of work. In these styles, you'll definitely be paid, but there's a limit to how much you can earn. So freelancers specify payment as part of their contract. So it's really important to be familiar with all the different compensation structures possible, and then of course the pros and cons for each. Now, this slide is just an introductory way. We're going to cover this in some of our more premium course content, so you can actually maximize each of the different methods, and then you can maximize how you're paid and what you ultimately earn. But for now, we just want to introduce the methods. So take a look at this graph. You can see all the different ways, and that should give you the introductory way of, gosh, how do you actually get paid in a freelance type gig? Okay, so that covers how and where to freelance. Hopefully this gave a nice overview of the subject and you have a bit more confidence in terms of what it means to actually be a freelancer, what it means to actually get one of these jobs. In the next video, we want to start to get a bit more specific. So we're going to do two things. In the next video, we're going to cover what are the pros and cons of freelancing. Why do people get into it? Why has it become such an important part of our economy, an important part of the way that we work? And then the second piece is, well, why do people not like freelance gigs? Why do people still seek out that full-time employment? Why do people not want to do this sort of work? So we'll cover the pros and cons. And then in the video after that, we're going to get into the most common jobs that will accept freelancers. So let's get into these next couple videos.